Modern superhero-themed movies can potentially bring in massive amounts of revenue. There is quite a lot of money to be made from these films. But the speculative scenario is this: the intentional yet subliminal advertisements within Marvel and DC movies. The films of comics from the 2000s on through to the 2010s redefine what could be adapted from a comic book, and the particular success with the films in terms of revenue show that there is an undeniable market for casual and serious audiences of the related content. But this was not always the reality of such features, as at the time, studios did not consider DC or Marvel films to be financially viable for a potential investment. From information now known, Marvel and DC at times use sponsorship-based deals from various companies for placements of their products within the early films of Marvel and DC, to help pay for the development of the film and to offset costs from the studio itself. Whilst audiences of films released during those years and decades noticed that the particular placement of products within the said movies were either bluntly obvious or slightly discreet, all depending on the amount of money given to the studio during filming, or the intention of the company whose product is being displayed for audiences to notice. This was clearly intentional through the said sponsorships, as either the film was successful or a failure in terms of revenue earned. Whenever the said film was seen, royalties would be paid out to the various company for their product being displayed, but the studio would also earn revenue through royalties as well, so both mutual parties benefited from the symbiotic relationship of funding in the early era of modern comic book movies. So the placement of product might not seem so invasive when the serious aspect of audiences for superhero-themed movies clearly knew that the products depicted are a plot mechanism to get viewers to potentially buy an item or request or prefer even a particular service. So to offset any financial loss to a film in the early era of modern superhero movies, these sponsorship deals were quite important, but not at all ethical according to popular opinion. Mainland China was becoming more accepting of Western movies, and American films in particular were extraordinarily interested in the possible revenue from Asia. Examples given were G.I. Joe was an iconic depiction from the United States, but such couldn't or wouldn't be allowed in its original form for the Asian market, so the entire brand was remade to be more acceptable to European and Asian regions. While not exactly a superhero-themed film, it was perceived that the Asian audiences wouldn't be able to necessarily know the difference. Scenes from Transformers 4 were filmed on set in Hong Kong to appeal to the mainland Chinese as well as the Hong Konger audiences. And Age of Ultron had an important aspect of the plot relating to Korea, but by all aspects of prior story or relating to plot, none of it necessarily makes much sense to audiences, but to a superficial interpretation of the movie, it doesn't need to at all. It's just there in the story as a throwaway plot segment for Western audiences, but to Eastern audiences at the time, it made them feel included to have their country depicted on their culture seen for the entire world to experience through the said film. Occasionally, in the times since the early era of modern comic book based adaptations, there have been other examples made for advertisements, but the consumerism culture of the United States has made such a standard depending on the adaptation in consideration. But whenever the topic is discussed, there will always be an understanding or lack of understanding as for why advertisements existed in the films from that era.